not.
I know who you are.
No, you don't.
You're Rosie.
My name's Nobody.
Nobody's called Nobody.
I am.
Why?
Because nobody's perfect.
Rosie! 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 Darling, come on. It's all right.
This is the story of the history of a murderer, and you first meet my character as Angel, and you find out what she has become, and then you work backwards. You travel backwards through her life to find out how she became Angel.
Fallen Angel, it's extremely interesting because it's a story told backwards, and that may even be unique. It's certainly rare. It may even be unique.
I feel very, very strongly that we can never understand the present. And this holds true in almost any area of human life. We can never understand the present unless we understand the first, unless we first try to understand the past.
The audience is ahead of us as far as events are concerned, but behind us as far as the reasons for those events are concerned.
It is also about a legacy. And it's quite epic in its scope in that it takes, I think, something in the order of 25 years to tell.
The Roth trilogy began with the title of the first of the volumes, The Four Last Things. And that just floated into my head one day, and I think about 1994, out of nowhere. I couldn't remember what they were, so I looked them up, and they're, in theology, they're death, judgment, hell, and heaven. And I thought right away, this is the perfect foundation for a crime novel of some sort.
It's a cross. Death, judgment, heaven. There's a chapel in Dante Road. Inferno, hell.
For me, I really had to work on, what were the key moments in Rosemary's life, how each person had affected her. Because it's not just the traumas in her life, the suicide and the killing of the grandfather and Vanessa, it's Audrey as well, it's Michael, it's absolutely everyone who has surrounded her from when she was a little girl has pushed her in some way towards doing these terrible things, and Andrew created that world. So I really kept on going back to the book, and then wanted to marry that with Peter's screenplay, which is brilliant.
What Peter Ransley had achieved there, because he'd essentially taken my novels apart, discarded some things that he didn't need, that weren't appropriate for TV, and for various reasons, added some of his own, reassembled them, and yet he'd done so in a way that seemed true to the core of what I'd written. It was an absolutely fascinating insight into the creative process, I suppose, how a story can be transferred from one medium to another.
Don't be stupid.
The character of Angel really began with a question: how can these psychopathic serial killers do what they do? Why do they do it?
If I was seeing Angel, the first thing I would do is ask her to give me the story of her life. And I'd go through it in a very structured way. And I'd be looking for the points at which things didn't work out the way she wanted. Whosoever was raised in those conditions would find it difficult to thrive.
Let me sing!
And they would have had some psychological difficulties. I think Angel's brings to it the temperament that she was born with, which will complicate things.
I felt that Rosie was born as an innocent, and children are born as innocent, and that it was what happened to her very early on in her life which began to disturb her, And I think if you've killed at 5 or 6, even whether you know what you've done or you don't know what you've done, that will remain with you forever.
One of the biggest arguments in the piece is this sort of nature-nurture argument. You know, what makes a killer? And I think we're endlessly fascinated by that, and nobody really knows what makes a killer.
By placing labels on things like nature and nurture, it can actually oversimplify the complexity of individual human beings.
My belief is I don't think anybody's born evil, so I do come down on the side of nurture.
And I did say this through production regularly, that I believe firmly that it would be a mistake. We cannot sit there and say somebody is turned out this way because of factor X. So the notion that actually she was born bad or was she made bad by events, I genuinely don't know. But also I just feel that, you know, it would be absolutely wrong of us as presenters of a story to be arrogant and say, this person turned out this way because of this.
Okay, one more, please. Cut. Hey, cut there.
David Byfield does feel responsible for the way his daughter has turned out. I personally don't think he is. I think she was a bad egg to begin with.
She may have feelings, and they're likely to be the extreme feelings, but without perhaps the nuance that you'd have normally. So she may have lust or she may have anger, but she may not have intermediate states. So she might be able to kind of flip quite quickly. And ultimately, nothing has any deep meaning because there's a core of emptiness.
Come on, Rosie. Give Mummy a cuddle.
You have a brother or a sister to play with.
Don't want a brother or sister to play with. Got Angel. Angel doesn't want a baby. Rosie doesn't want a baby. No, never, never, never!
Rosie!
That's okay, I'll go. You all right?
Rosie!
There are lots of different things that make Rosie become Angel. You can't point the finger of blame. And I think for me, when I first read the script, that's what was interesting. It's much subtler than you expect it to be. As a why done it rather than the who done it.
There are 3 facets to the core traits of psychopathy. One is emotional, where people are cold and callous.
How long is she staying?
She is Wendy. She's my very best friend, and she's staying as long as she likes.
How long will that be?
There's another facet of psychopathy, which is the interpersonal aspect of it, which is typically someone who is grandiose and narcissistic and incredibly egotistical.
They all need to be taught this.
What do you mean, there?
If you're wrong, they must pay.
What do you mean?
Are too thick. Too stupid to understand, Eddie.
And there's a third facet of psychopathy, which is behavioural, which typically involves people being very impulsive.
The main thing is that one of you is not telling the truth.
You mean you don't believe me, Father?
That's not what I said. I said one of you.
The key words for me were David said she's become institutionalised. So I needed to make it quite bland, quite clear shaped outlines for her. No pattern at all. We've kept blue and white quite a lot in the third one because that is quite a good ecclesiastical colour and it helps with the religious obsession. And then I'm going to have the little girl in blue and white as well, quite a bit. And then also in some pattern that will echo what she carries on choosing as she's a grown-up.
The West case was one of my starting points because that happened very near where we live, and we knew people who'd known Fred West. There was a real sense of outrage that ran through the community. Not just outrage, but curiosity, a sort of very dark, shocked curiosity. Just how could these things be in the middle of an ordinary small town? Beverly Allitt, too, was about the same time. And, of course, there you had a nurse killing the children in her charge.
A dangerous woman is very unpredictable. There's the intensity of emotion there. There's the impulsivity, which can be, in fact, that's a classical diagnosis, massive impulsivity. And people can be extremely variable. And so in the morning they're fine, and in the afternoon they're dangerous.
Sorry, Dad, I'm not going to stay and listen to anymore. I'm sorry, but you'll have to. You see, it's not just Michael.
Gareth Prentice saw the knife in her bag.
The police are questioning him now. I'll punish you, Michael Appleton, if it takes me the rest of my life! How can you do this to me? I hate you! I hate you!
You can talk to someone in a secure unit or the state hospital and say, are you happy with how your life's turned out, when they've been detained under the Mental Health Act for the rest of their life until they pass the tribunal? And they say, yeah, it's been okay, really.
I chose to make the murderer a woman for two reasons. One was that a friend of mine who had worked as a nurse, a psychiatric nurse on closed wards, said the women patients were always the worst. That she said once, you could look into their eyes sometimes and you could see evil. Not the men, but the women. They were the ones that really, really scared her. And this is a hard-bitten, well-trained, very professional nurse saying this. The other thing was something Tolstoy once said. He said that we tend to think that physical beauty has a moral equivalent. We tend to think because someone looks pretty, looks beautiful, they're going to be nice. We want them to be nice. All our culture sort of encourages that. And so I thought, I put those two together and thought, right, we're going to have a beautiful woman, and she is going to be so lovely. I'm going to be half in love with her, but she'll also be a mass murderer.
Hi. Just taking my niece home. I hope she didn't disturb you this morning.
Oh, no, not at all. I was wondering. Bit of a handful.
Yes, she's a little monkey. But I do miss her when she's gone.
Maybe you'll have one of your own someday.
I hope so.
Quite often people will see someone attractive who's committed a serious crime and they say, I don't know how they could do that. You know, they're nice.
Surely some mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so there were cases of serial killers who were very handsome and had no reason to commit the offences that they did, except they're serial killers. I mean, they're predators.
At the end of book one, when she's in Broadmoor, in the book, he has her waiting for her father with her hands on the table, and her hands are palms downwards. And I really wanted to know, there are loads of things like this in the book, I really wanted to know why he'd specifically put her with her palms downwards on the table. He sweetly then wrote me this wonderful email, answering all sorts of my questions, but talking about the hands, and that the hands are a sign of ageing, and that Angel's eternal quest is for youth, and also because her hands have done such appalling things. In rehearsals, I specifically requested to come in and be with Tiger Lily when she was rehearsing episode 3, because that's really the start of the story. She sets Rosie up, even though you see it last.
Auntie Wendy?
Yes, darling?
I'm really looking forward to my birthday.
And what would you like?
An angel, please.
Okay. Well, we'll have to see what we can do.
She listens, and that's really, for me, what when I first read the story, she's one of those little girls who's watching the whole adult world around her and not necessarily reacting outwardly to it, but she's absorbing all of it, and that is, I think, what then the dam sort of builds and then bursts in her adult life.
There's a similar kind of stare that Emilia Fox does, and that Tiger Lily's got for free, which is just sort of a slightly looking into the distance, which is fantastic.
You can't rehearse a 5-year-old or 6-year-old. I mean, you can't really discuss subtext. You've got to rely completely upon their instincts. And it's catching lightning in a bottle. The fascinating thing about audio visual storytelling is you can put one shot against another shot, and the counterpoint between those two things create a third thing.
What I think the 3 films do is they demonstrate how people ignore what's going on.
The early signs.
So, yeah, all those early signs. So in film 2, the viewer knows what's going on in Rosemary's mind, but at the same time, they can pick up why people ignore it.
What would Janet have made of it all, I wondered? Would she have thought, like I did, that Rosemary was just being a typical teenager, falling in love with love, drinking too much, reading bad poetry?
The grandfather has gone back to being a child again, so they have this affinity together and they have this imaginary world together. She trusts him. And again, I think that's a question which is brought up again and again and again. You know, who should Rosemary have placed her trust in life? And she trusts the grandfather. Maybe later, if you choose to read it that way, discovers that that was a terrible breach of trust. But, you know, was he in his right mind? Who should have controlled that? David. And maybe the blame comes to rest with him.
Somewhere in Tickleland is a secret cave. Mrs. Harris has come for her tickle.
Come on, not at bedtime. Come on. Come on.
Night-night.
What's going on?
Daddy!
Oh, we were just saying goodnight to Rosie.
One of the earliest choices I made was that Angel had to be the daughter of a clergyman, of a priest. That relationship between David Byfield and Rosie, Angel, is the central one to the whole trilogy. That is the pivot on which the whole thing turns. In a way, Rosie becomes what she is, at least partly because what her father is. Her father becomes what he is, partly because of what Rosie becomes. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's absolutely crucial. I can't emphasise that enough.
Both David and Rosemary are sort of paradoxes within themselves because they love each other, but don't show it to each other. David loves Rosemary blindly. He doesn't ever see what she's doing or really what she needs. And she, in turn, adores him, but shows it in such a bizarre, attention-seeking way. And so they have this huge amount of emotion, but are very bad in communicating it. And hence, and the way they communicate it is terribly cold.
Hello, Rosemary.
Hello, Daddy.
I think he probably takes her a little for granted and leaves a lot of her upbringing to his wife. But I don't think he's necessarily a bad father.
You're saying goodbye to Daddy.
Bye, Dad.
Rosie's going to school.
Bye, Rosie.
Well, Rule Dean's up for the treasurer's job as well. He doesn't know one end of a balance sheet from the other.
Part of the reason that he's so impressed by her and enthralled by her is because he thinks she embodies all the fantasies he has about the perfect child.
Right.
And nobody's perfect.
That's for you, for being so clever.
Dad, it's gorgeous. Thanks.
Take steady.
Sorry. Look, it's the offer. If I get the grades.
We will.
It's almost a way to punish a child, to make them think that they're perfect. Because when they get faced by reality, and there are the problems of life, then how do you handle it? So, but if you understand that, you know, when no one's perfect, one can live with it.
Well?
B's in French and history, A's in English and Latin.
Well, it's very good, Rosie.
Shit. You know it is.
I'm sorry, Rosemary, I really am, but it's not the end of the world.
What a fucking stupid thing to say it is. That's exactly what it is. It's the end of my world. I needed 4 A's to get into Cambridge, and I would have got them if you hadn't been here. What would you know? You're only interested in one thing.
Rosie.
In one way, it's a tragedy of love, because I think David loves Rosie as much as he loves anyone. I think probably as much as she can love anybody, Rosie loves David on some level. And the tragedy is that the fruit of that love is murder, sadness, and huge evil.
She doesn't get the love, Rosemary, that everybody needs. It's her lack of nurture, if I can use that word, that is at the centre of the problems. He seeks to charge his emotions through sex, with the consequences that we see.
And one of the things I wanted to dramatise in David Byfield was the way his sexuality was permanently at war with his calling as a priest.
Yes, David Byfield is quite repressed emotionally. It kind of bursts out of him sometimes. One or two occasions when he's kind of frustrated, either because of the way his career is going or because of the problems he's having with the women in his life. As far as the films are concerned, he seemed to be having a problem with his first wife, and then having a problem with his second wife. And then finally, when he gets it together with somebody, she turns out to be a heroin addict. So, he doesn't have a lot of luck.
My feeling about Angel's father is that he was a very passionate man who was perhaps constrained very much by his strong spiritual beliefs, which made him actually very sexually frustrated.
I don't want to. I don't.
I do.
No.
I need
No.
to.
Get off me!
Vanessa! 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 Vanessa!
He's a very fine man, but he's very, he is. He's very passionate, and she's not. I think Vanessa is someone who actually would rather just live with David but not have any sort of sexual relationship with him. And I don't think she has any idea what she's taken on in terms of David's daughter, Rosie. And I think her image of how the marriage is going to be is completely confounded when she gets stuck into it.
I think eventually he's doing research on a book of Thomas Aquinas. He's probably actually found his true vocation then.
When I went to the Christian Resources exhibition, all the different stands had masses of different catalogues. And I found one place in Ireland that made me the most wonderful shirts for Charles in beautiful fine cottons. And there was a whole array of different styles and shapes to choose from. And you could see all the different sorts of collar and things that we could have. And it was absolutely brilliant because they were, of course, made to measure and I could pick the right colour and fabric and so on. When I went there to organise about this cassock and to organise a cassock for Charles, there was a bishop there having a fitting. And he was brilliant because I said, oh, no, I'm really illegal and you're here for real purposes. And he said, oh, what are you doing? And I said, I've come to organise a cassock for Charles' dance. And he said, oh, what for? And I told him. And he said, very fine novels. I enjoyed them. I look forward to seeing the show, which was marvellous. I thought we had the blessing of the church.
What I felt when I read the book and when I read the script was that because you're finding out about her history, you understand what has caused Rosemary and Angel to become a psychopath.
It was there I first came across Francis Yulgreave. His poetry was dreadful. Here the quick make no shadow, and no feet tread in the soundless halls of the office of the dead.
Francis Yulgreave, priest and poet. He is my own creation, I must admit it, but he was sort of loosely based on people like Francis Thompson, Aleister Crowley, Aubrey Beardsley, all those sort of fin de siècle, louche characters who the middle classes seem to spawn then. I created him basically because he interested me so much and I had so much fun making up his poetry. He wasn't somebody who was going to play a very significant role in the original planning, insofar as I had a plan. He's somebody who, as the series developed, emerged out of the woodwork and just demanded to come more and more centre stage. In a way, he possessed the trilogy rather than the other way around. He really surprised me how he insisted, his voice insisted on being heard.
Francis Hillgrave, bloody hell. I think Francis Hillgrave comes to haunt this show like a bad smell. You know, Wendy gets consumed with this guy because he's so kind of remarkable character. Black, dark, strange character. And who we never know. The only evidence of Francis Hillgrave is these damn journals and some photographs. So Wendy's consumed with him, at the expense of other things. Rosie is completely consumed with him. And of course, Vanessa, David's second wife, is completely consumed with him at the expense of the relationship. And it falls in line with the kind of the overall kind of backbeat of the show, which is that we're looking at things centre stage when what is really important is the things that are in the wings.
Francis wrote his most famous poem there, The Four Last Things.
Death and judgment, heaven and hell.
Very good, Mrs. Byfield. And he took his own life there, after being hounded by people like you.
I've seen his ghost.
All your nonsensical ideas. Francis loved children.
I don't know what's more rotten, his verse or his behaviour.
Do you think that's blood? Look, Dad, look. His hairs and everything.
What on earth made you come here?
This is where he did his sacrifices. Francis Hillgrave. It was an Audrey's book. They must have read it.
The book seemed to me to be a comment on the sacrificial aspect of religion, which is very pertinent to our day and age. And I have never understood why we worship a blood-stained figure on the cross. And part of the story is Rosemary becoming fixated to this blood-stained figure.
There's the way that people can use religion for their own strange ends. I mean, we see it in every newspaper we open. I think somebody is using religion for very, very perverted ends. I wanted to explore how that could happen with a psychopath.
I know it sounds crazy, but religious fanatics justify anything and everything from their texts.
They will often work their way through a number of different belief systems because obviously really there is no core to what they believe.
It's a very common pattern with a psychopathic killer that they have a partner. You know, Mara Hindley, Ian Brady, the Wests. Very often it seems that one partner is the dominant partner, the other is the accessory who, in a sense, is enthralled to the other. I wanted to explore that relationship, and I think the personality of the one who's enthralled is very fascinating because, in a sense, they're the ultimate victim. They're so much the victim that they become part of the killer.
Don't you like her, Eddie?
I won't do it.
I'll tell the police about the others, Eddie.
You wouldn't dare. You kept them there.
I returned them to their care homes. You took them.
What really surprised me as the book went on was how much I came to like Eddie, how much I came to sympathise with him and feel that he was very much more sinned against than sinning.
I was helping her to swim.
You were touching her.
I wasn't.
Well, then how did you keep her afloat?
Eddie came to being as a complete accident. I knew Angel would need a sidekick in The Four Last Things, the first novel. And I vaguely thought I'd have a standard issue paedophile, low intelligence, male, more or less would do whatever he was told.
You wouldn't, would you?
Wouldn't I? Oh, Eddie. You are wonderful. You never realise when I'm joking, do you? Of course I wouldn't. We work together, don't we? Silly Billy.
I don't know how I ever lived without you, Angel.
Eddie would be desperate for human contact, for some kind of support, someone who accepts him for who he is, rather than as some evil person who he's more like to be an inadequate person than an evil person. So he is a sitting duck to be taken advantage of.
Angel, again, knows Eddie's weakness, so she can use it and easily manipulate Eddie. I think that the double act and the male-female balance within such an evil and outrageous act as kidnapping children and doing appalling things to them, you know, it is a bizarre mirroring, I suppose, in the most appalling way of a sort of parenting.
Wendy only really appeared when I wrote the third book. I knew I had a female character there who would be involved, but it was only when I began to think about that third book, The Office of the Dead, that I heard her voice, and I knew she was a Yorkshire lass. I knew she liked a gin and tonic. I knew she was a good time girl, and I knew she was very unhappy, and she was made even more unhappy by coming to a cathedral close where her friend Janet appeared to have the perfect life and the perfect marriage, the perfect child.
Well, we had to have Wendy, who is basically telling the story from the start, to show that this was not just a serial killer story, that this was a story about the family.
I remember saying to Eileen Quinn very early on, when Eileen said that they were going to bring Wendy into the first book, i.e. the one set in the present, I said to her, I wish I'd thought of that, if only I'd known, because she's, in terms of the narrative structure, she's such a useful figure.
Wendy, of course, comes into the story seemingly as an outsider, but she has more knowledge of his daughter than he seems to have. And there's a kind of almost a love-hate relationship between David Byfield and Wendy. You know, she's a thorn in his side to begin with, forever pricking his conscience about him being rather neglectful of his first wife and their child, because she's thinking much more about where his career might be going.
Wendy's the unifying principle. She is really the heart and the soul of the three films, and by having her right at the beginning, we hope that this would carry the viewers emotionally right through to the end.
And Wendy's interesting because she's sort of mysterious, and particularly the way Clare Holman has interpreted her. She's quite shut down, she's quite mysterious. So you see this woman who's watching everything and a part of the whole kidnap, but not absolutely at the front, at the foreground of the action. And you think, what's wrong with her? There's something going on under the surface, and I think that's quite fascinating. And then, of course, we understand what's wrong with her as the film develops.
Wendy works as a kind of Greek chorus almost. She's always observing, always seeing what's going on, and she knows there's something slightly rotten at the centre of the family. She can't put her finger on it, but she knows there's something slightly rotten. And she's like one of those people who can't quite keep her finger out of the trouble. She sees trouble and she keeps poking at it.
How much did you hear?
By the time he came up the stairs, I could hardly come out the bedroom trilling hello. When he had a go at you,
You don't know how difficult it is for him.
For him?
I drew on a family background, which is a Yorkshire background, where people don't very often talk about things, express a lot of emotions. You go with the flow.
You look at Wendy, and the thing that drives her through this whole story is the secret that she carries. And she's in denial of that secret for 25 years. But the secret won't lie down.
I hope what you get is, what's been really good for me to play is somebody who's just slightly submerged in the first two films, and you just see her on the edge all the time.
And I did find myself, you know, and occasionally whispering in Claire's ear, because it's guilt, you know. Don't forget the guilt, don't forget the guilt.
The thing that made me most nervous was playing 62. That terrified me, really scared the pants off me because, well, I just didn't think I could look 62. I didn't know how they were going to do it, you know, prosthetics or what they were going to. I thought I was going to be laughable, you know, that people would just find it hysterically funny and that I would be like, I don't know, Catherine Tate or I don't know, what, you know, that nobody would be able to take me seriously.
We padded Claire out. She's much bigger. We made her bottom and her bust and her waist much thicker. And she's been, and given her fairly flat shoes, which has helped her to stand differently.
What I did was I brought some photographs in of my mother. She's 70 odd, but I brought some photographs in of her and they copied her hair. They made a wig and they copied her hair. And they saw that actually my mother ages quite well, in fact, very well. So in a way, it was really useful for them to know how much to do for me. So they copied the hair, and then what they do is they put something called old age stipple around here, which is they separate the skin and they put this sort of sticky stuff on, and then they blow dry it with a hairdryer, and then they put talcum powder on it, and then they let go, and it all sort of crinkles up. So you have that all round your eyes and all down here, and a bit. Well, they don't put it on your neck; they just put lines, increase the lines on your neck, the existing lines. And the wig and a pair of glasses, and that was it.
He practiced sacrifice. Rosie was obsessed with him when she was a teenager. Wasn't she, David?
But also what I was experiencing was that people either didn't recognise me or they just ignored me. And on the very first day when I turned up, Claudia Blakely, who plays my daughter-in-law in the piece, and my grandchild, we turned up and the first assistant director took Claudia off and said, "Welcome to the set, it's really nice to see you, come this way," and left me standing there. And I thought, that's a bit weird, that's a bit rude. That's not very nice. So I got down to the set and he went, "Oh my God, it's you. I thought you were the chaperone. I was just thinking that chaperone's too old." And I thought, yay, we've succeeded, that's fantastic.
The best description of this story is actually on the cover of the book. It's described there as the archaeology of a murderer.
I wanted to go from the present to the past, and I wasn't quite sure why it was important, but I knew it was important. It had to work that way. And I certainly had no idea at all how the trilogy would end, how I would resolve things.
They are very specific periods because we are actually next Easter 2007, so I need to make it look modern but neutral, not a lot of very kind of high fashion from this year, because then it would look odd next year, and it needed to be very bland and about the people, not about a particular point in time. And then we go back to 1991, which is substantially different. It's 16 years ago. The silhouettes are very, very different, and I've looked at what we did, and Heather, my supervisor, got a lot of magazines off eBay for me, which was really useful. We got Hello and Woman and that kind of thing. So we had it's amazing, all those photographs of Princess Diana. This was Princess Diana's trip to Pakistan, but there was an amazing picture of Princess Diana in a pink dress, really fabulous, but it was a perfect shape, and we found a marvellous sort of light jade green, and we copied the shape of this dress, but in this beautiful light jade green, and because the reason I had to make it was I needed 4, because we were going to, this was the dress she then ends up being stabbed in, and also needed a stunt double for.
The period costume and what people thought was beautiful then. I mean, even though it's really a short time ago, that defines people. It's more regimented. People are tighter. People are kind of stuck in those big shoulder pads.
1979 was even odder because we're going back even further in time. And at the moment, I haven't fitted everything, but I have fitted Emma Fielding, who plays Janet, who's David Byfield's first wife. And that was very weird because it is a completely different shape yet again. Different coloured tights, different sort of underwear, and other different colours too. And then once we put her together, it really did take you back. It's extraordinary, particularly once the hair and makeup was done, because that makes a huge difference.
Makeup in 1991, it's actually, we didn't realise it at the time, but we're much more sophisticated now. We apply it much better than we did then. And so it's just a little bit rough around the edges. The eyes are a bit heavier on the whole. And there was a particularly nasty shade of pink that was very popular. So And there was no gloss, really. It was shimmer. It was just silly changes like that. So obviously I use all that reference, and obviously hair, slightly different, bigger, along with the big shoulder pads you were in with the power dressing, the big hair.
Lily, Joe, I just want to just see where you are at the end of the second look. You take a look. No, standing's better. It's good.
Okay, stand by then. Here we go. On the rehearsal, please, and we're panning right the way round there, guys, as Elliot goes out.
The question that we are left with, and it's a question that I don't think we can answer. But she asks this question of herself, she asks this question of David Byfield, and therefore I suspect she asks this question of us, the audience. You know, what was I to do? What was the best thing that I could have done?
And you asked me if could it have been prevented, and I said absolutely not. I don't think so, no. And of course, as I'm doing this one, I suddenly realised that that's not quite true, and I think probably I was an actress in deep denial, which was, well, you know, identifying with a character, making excuses for her behaviour, I think. But actually now, as I reach this point, where, as I say, she's in an innocent position, you suddenly realise, well, of course there's something that she could have done and should have done, which is speak up about the secret, and maybe this child could have got some help.
I wish Mummy was here.
Rosie, have you ever told anyone this? Daddy?
No, never.
Well, then don't. Never, ever. Promise.
But it's only when you look back with the benefit of hindsight that all the bits join up, and it could happen to anyone. I don't think she's culpable in that way.
I don't know if Rosie / Angel's actions could have been prevented, to be honest with you. I don't know.
Right at the end of the whole story, which was the most difficult part to write, really, when we're at the end of the confessional, Rosemary is running towards her father, who is scooping her up, and Wendy is pregnant, and it is, to me, an incredibly happy moment, and it's the emotional atmosphere that makes it impossible for Wendy to actually to see this young, happy girl recovered from the death of her mother, running into the arms of her father. And this is why we hide, this is why we conceal. It's never going to happen again. Everything is going to be good. And you can't blame, I feel you can't blame Wendy, and I feel David doesn't in the end.
Wendy, we could have done something. We could have helped her, surely.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh. You may hate the church, Wendy, but you're a much better Christian than I am. You were the good shepherd. I was the hireling, never there when the wolf came.
One of the most moving things for me about this, once you get through all three, when you view them as one whole film, is that David, for years, is a man who's been torturing himself, believing that he caused Rosemary to kill Vanessa. He doesn't know she killed anyone else prior to that. And he did it through his lust and his sin and not paying attention and not being a good dad. And so he's shut down and he's become very guilty about that, despite a seemingly arrogant facade. Meanwhile, Wendy has been in a parallel track, really guilty and shut down over the fact that she had to make a choice and not reveal that Rosemary at 5 was a killer.
I don't think one could like someone who did the terrible things that she does to children, but I think that there will be, I hope, an understanding in the history of it and
and perhaps even a sympathy for what she was as a little girl and became as an adult.
I have enormous sympathy for Angel because I think she's not responsible for what she is. The fact that what she is somebody capable of enormous evil acts, she may never be able to change and become happier, wholer, more whole. I don't think we should condemn her entirely as a person. We all have little bits of Angel in ourselves. We're all human.
You know, sympathy for the devil. Dreadful person. Sick, without one shadow of a doubt. Dreadful, dreadful person. But we're all there, you know. We're all there. It's all us.